So I'm going to fairly quickly go through this following a couple of slides so we can get to the reason for the first plenary. We just want to mention that the origins and focus of this conference stem from almost a decade of work and discussions with a whole bunch of people from across the country, coast to coast to coast, that culminated in the Canadian Domestic Homicide Prevention Initiative with vulnerable populations. And as described in your program, there's more detail there. It's a 5-year SSHRC-funded project that the ultimate goal is to reduce domestic homicides. As you can see on the slide, we want to conduct research on domestic homicides, which is in progress, to identify protocols and strategies to reduce risk, particularly among vulnerable and marginalized populations, to improve access to risk assessment, risk management, and safety planning, and to share this knowledge with, and more importantly, learn from the wider community that interacts with victims, perpetrators, and their families on a regular basis. So as you probably know, in looking at the program, we have identified 4 vulnerable marginalized populations to begin to look at. We recognize that these are obviously not the only vulnerable populations, but they're the ones that the literature and discussions with individuals throughout the past decade has shown that are the most vulnerable in this, at this stage. And so that's Indigenous populations, rural, remote, and northern populations, children exposed to domestic violence who can also be victims of domestic homicides, and immigrant and refugee women. In doing this work, we recognize, as Minister Monsaf said, that we have to take an intersectional approach because these 4 identities are obviously overlapping. One individual or one family does not just have one identity, so it means focusing on multiple identities at the same time. So currently we're in the midst of developing our domestic homicide database. We're completing a comprehensive literature review, which will be made available publicly when it's completed. We've administered a national key informant survey in which we've had 1,400 respondents, and we're currently interviewing individuals that agreed to be interviewed following those surveys, and these are individuals that work with risk assessment, risk management, and safety planning among vulnerable populations. Some of this work will be featured throughout the conference in the next 2 days, along with a lot of other really innovative work that will be featured. Our team of 60 people met all day yesterday in part to discuss the final part of this project, which is a case control study that will look at trying to identify if there's risk factors that are more unique to domestic homicide. So again, we summarize some of this information in your program if you want to take a look. We also draw your attention to our website, cdhpi.ca, which there's more information there on some of the work that we've been doing. Just to close, in terms of discussing the project, it's often a large and daunting task to take on a project like this, and periodically it becomes more daunting than others. So I want to draw your attention to the last 4 pages of the program, which pays homage to everyone who has contributed so much to this initiative so far, including our National Research Coordinator, Marcy Campbell, and our project manager, Annalise Stratman, who are sitting in the front here. I also want to acknowledge Jordan Fairbairn, who was part of the management team early on and left to begin Parenthood and is now coming back as a collaborator. I also want to acknowledge the very significant contributions of our co-investigators that represent various regions of the country, including Diane Crocker, Miriam Dubé, Mary Hampton, Nicole Latournay, Kate Rossiter, and Jane Ursel. Finally, as you'll see in the program, the nuts and bolts of this research would not have progressed to the date that it has progressed to so far without the more than 20 amazing research assistants that we have working with us on the project, and that number continues to grow, and we're very excited about that. And then finally, last but not least, we list our 45 collaborators and 36 partners whose logos are also shown on our conference banner, who represent the country from coast to coast to coast, so that the initiative's work captures both the similarities of our country as well as the uniqueness in various regions across Canada. The value of their expertise is limitless, and we continue to be thankful for their interest and participation.
I want to introduce our opening speakers for our plenary. The slide you see is the motto that you find when you walk in the office of the Chief Coroner of Ontario, which is, we speak for the dead to protect the living. And it's a reminder that in doing this work, we treasure and we honor the voices of survivors and victims. And we're going to hear directly from 4 women who have lost sisters, mothers, children to domestic homicide. These are very painful and difficult discussions, and it's hard to do justice to them in a large forum such as this one. We've asked each of these women to speak for 15 minutes to highlight some of the lessons learned in terms of what they've had to deal with, and hopefully some of the lessons that might prevent tragedies in similar circumstances in the future. So again, this is a daunting task to do in 15 minutes. But one of the things I wanted to say at the outset is that you're going to have a chance to talk to each of these individuals in much greater depth and detail if you wish. They're going to be each, certainly 2 of them, Terry and Marianne, are going to be doing individual workshops following the plenary. Maha will be available throughout the conference to be involved in any discussions with you. And Marie Paul has written a book about her experiences, and it's on display, and she's prepared to talk with you individually. So again, I want to say at the outset that 15 minutes is too short a time, but we want to at least give each of the women a chance to touch on these important issues and then have a greater chance to talk with you at a much more personal level at workshops or throughout the conference. I'm not going to read bios individually. The bios are in the program, so I'm just going to highlight the speaking order. Terry Brown, who lost her sister Ada, will speak first. She'll be followed by Marie Paul McGuinness, mother of Justin and Jerome, and she'll be speaking in French, and we'll have simultaneous translation on the stage. Maha Elbarani will be talking about her mother Sonia, and Marianne Rich will be talking about her sister Shirley. So we'll start with Terry. Welcome, Terry. Yes, definitely.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Good morning, elders, youth, professionals, and Indigenous peoples. I bring warm greetings to the Oneida of the Thames, the Chippewa of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware, and I thank you for allowing us to meet in a good way in your sacred territory, and I look forward to meeting you. I have a qualifier. I'm not an expert or a researcher on family violence. What I will share with you today is a first-hand account of my life, my experiences as an Indigenous woman, a survivor of the Indian residential school system, survivor of rape and sexual abuse, domestic abuse, and a survivor of cultural genocide and colonialism. I'm a survivor. I wish I were not. While we are enduring, resilient people, it is time we begin to thrive and live in peace and harmony on our traditional territories. It is my pleasure to address you all who care about domestic violence and the patterns of abuse that has reigned upon our nation since the coming of the visitors from Europe and abroad. We have 15 minutes. While it is very short, we will open our hearts and embrace each other in ways that are very important to stopping abuse and violence of all women. Indigenous women have been the center of our communities from time immemorial. We are strong, resilient people. We love our people dearly. I'm from a family of 8 with 6 surviving members. My one brother froze to death, suffering from the impact of Indian residential school that destroyed his life. My brother Harry and I are both survivors of that system. My baby sister, Ada Elaine Brown, was born on October 11th, 1959, in Cassiar, BC, the youngest of our little tribe. She was the only one born in a hospital. The rest of us were delivered by midwives in our home. I want you to know how adorable she was and how much we spoiled her, how much we loved her. I was her caretaker and spent hours with a traditional swing. I think most of our nations had these swings where we sing to the baby, rock them to sleep. And I sang to her. I taught her to walk. I taught her to talk. She was the most loving little girl. I can still hear her cute little baby talk. When she died, she was just another dead Indian. You know the story. It's the lifestyle. It's the bad choices. Wrong place at the wrong time. Let's be frank, those still are the discriminating attitudes we face today in our daily lives. It was not the first time she'd been to a doctor, sick, lonely, beaten, scared. Before she died, she'd been to the doctor 3 days in a row. She was given Tylenol 3s and sent home. She told the doctor she was beat up downtown. She was beaten many times by her partner, who preyed upon her, and if he is still alive today, is doing that to another woman. Message for the medical profession: take your job seriously. If you don't care about the people, don't work with them. Take time to report anything suspicious. Do your job if you see someone beaten. Check for head injuries, ask questions, call the police, call a shelter. Domestic violence kills. Take the time, you may save a life. Message to the police too, to do your job. If you do not want to be the part of the solution, find another profession. When my oldest sister received the call that our sister was deceased, she asked, what happened to her? The response from the RCMP was that she died of natural causes. Within hours of my sister's death, somehow they knew she died of natural causes. No autopsy, no investigation at that point, a note on the file, died of natural causes. I asked, how does one know that she died of natural causes at the age of 41? Any death of a young person should be investigated, especially when she has visible bruising, lacerations, new bruises upon old bruises. When we claimed our sister's body in Whitehorse, Yukon, we could barely recognize her. My oldest sister asked me, is that her? I think there's been a mistake. Please go and find out if that is her. I did ask further questions and could recognize her enough to say, this is our sister. Last week, our baby sister would have been 58 years old. Any death of a family member is difficult, but the grief of a loved one who died in a violent death with no justice is a searing, painful grief that continues to smolder and grip your life. It never goes away because there's no closure. There's blaming, there's shaming, there's a wandering heart that will never rest. Ada Elaine Brown has 2 children and 5 grandchildren she will never know. Our hearts are broken. How do we go on? How do we forgive? How do we reconcile? To bring change is a massive process. Extensive change is required in education, justice, child welfare, policing, and the medical professions. While it is true that violence exists within Indigenous communities, we must look at perpetrators who prey on Indigenous women from outside of our communities. We are talking about male perpetrators from all races, preying upon Indigenous women with impunity. Not all cases involve intimate relationship. Total strangers are known to attack our women and girls. Prevention is the key to the reduction of harm in family violence cases. We know that women are assaulted many times before they leave or before they are killed. Women who are abused frequent doctors' offices, hospital emergency wards, social workers, food banks, and courtrooms. Is it too far-fetched to have shelter workers in hospitals, in courtrooms, in the mall, in social welfare offices, walking the streets? We need commitment from governments, police, medical professions, and social workers to bring this necessary change. I want to give a very simple example of a best practice. I went into the Red Deer Hospital for a minor issue, and the nurse asked me, "Are you in an abusive relationship? Do you fear for your safety?" I said, "What?" I answered the questions. "No, I'm fine, everything's okay." I went home and asked my daughter, and she said, "Oh no," she said, "that's the policy now in that hospital. Everybody gets asked that question." I thought, what a great practice. Why not ask every woman? After all, every woman is at the risk of male violence if you're a woman. This simple yet loaded question can save lives. I don't know what would have happened if I said, yes, I am, but I'm assuming they had a safety plan in place. Before coming here, I spoke to an elder saying, I'm going to be doing this in a difficult task. And I said to her, it's about family violence. And her response was simply, put it in the hands of women. Women know women, and especially women who have experienced violence. They know what to do, what to say, and how to get women to safety. Funding is essential. We heard a representative from the government. The message is funding needs to get out there so we can do the job. 1 minute. I lost my speech. If we are to bring reconciliation, things have to be done differently. It cannot be the same way. I have hopes for the upcoming generations and hope they'll will be less tolerant of sexism, racism, and sexist and racist policies. Sexism and racism is pervasive and entrenched in Canadian society and will take large-scale efforts to change this. I do see changes in attitude, more interest in truth and reconciliation, but there's a lot of talk, but not enough action. We need to move into the action phase. The broader questions are, how do we change racism, specifically against Indigenous peoples? There's a specific form of racism that is directed and we reproduce from one generation to the next against Indigenous people, the owners of the land. What goes through my mind when I think about what could have been done differently in the homicide of my sister? I wonder, would my sister still be alive if a social worker referred her, if someone referred her to counseling, if a police officer was called by the doctor, if her partner was questioned, if she was hospitalized at some point and received proper diagnosis? She died of a brain aneurysm. The impact of family violence is great. Children who witness violence will have lasting health issues. Children will suffer mentally, emotionally, physically, and have a difficult time to be successful and well-adjusted as adults and provide healthy parenting. PTSD exists widely among our people, resulting from the residential school system and the foster care system. This area is not well known or well treated, along with depression. It is important to look at these areas to address the high rate of suicide among our youth. While this presentation is very difficult for me, I participate because I believe together we can make changes. I have opened my heart and soul to you so that we can better understand each other. I ask that you take this gift I have given you in my story and share it with others. That is how we learn from each other, by sharing, caring, and passing on our knowledge, person to person, heart to heart. Madu, everyone. Thank you, in my language, Madu Masicho, for being here. Aktigidet be with you all. Thank you.
Now call on Marie Paul with her translator.
Okay. Bonjour à vous tous.
Hello, everybody.
Avant de commencer, je voudrais vous dire que je suis vraiment désolée de ne pas pouvoir m'exprimer en anglais.
First of all, before starting, I would very much like to tell you that I'm very sorry that I'm not able to express myself in English.
Habituellement, je m'en tiens pas à mes notes pour faire les conférences,
Usually, I don't use my notes when I'm at a conference.
mais étant donné que le temps est limité, je vais m'en servir pour essayer de m'en tenir à l'essentiel.
But given the fact that time is limited, I am going to use my notes to try to remain adhered to what is essential here.
Mais, premièrement, merci infiniment de me donner le privilège d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui.
First of all, I would like to thank you infinitely for having given me the privilege of being among you today.
Eh bien, je me présente, Marie-Paul McInnes.
Let me introduce myself. My name is Marie-Paul McInnes.
Avant toute chose, je suis la maman de ces deux magnifiques petits garçons.
Before anything else, I'm the mom of these two marvelous little boys.
Je suis bachelière en psychologie,
I have a BA in psychology.
conférencière et auteure du livre La Survivante.
I'm a speaker and I'm the author of the book La Survivante, The Survivor.
Dans ce livre, mon témoignage raconte, entre autres, mes 8 longues années d'enfer dans la violence conjugale.
In this book, my testimony talks about, among others, my 8 long years of hell in family violence.
Cette violence s'est soldée par l'assassinat de mes 2 petits garçons, le 2 juillet 1996.
This violence ended with the murder of my 2 little boys on July the 2nd, 1996.
Mon drame s'est produit dans mon petit village natal de la Gaspésie.
My drama took place in my little native village in the Gaspésie.
Avec le recul, j'ai réalisé qu'il était encore plus difficile de dénoncer dans un endroit où les gens se connaissent tous personnellement.
In hindsight, I realized that it was even more difficult to denounce it in a place where people know each other at the personal level.
Le statut social et la réussite matérielle bien en vue de mon conjoint n'a fait qu'augmenter sa crédibilité et par le fait même resserrer la mienne.
the social status and the material success within reach of my partner did only created a situation whereby her credibility increased and at the same time my credibility was constricted.
La honte et la peur du jugement s'est ajoutée à l'emprise déjà bien présente dans le cycle de la violence conjugale.
Shame and fear of being judged was added to what was already there in this cycle of domestic violence.
Sous le contrôle d'un grand manipulateur, j'ai dû redoubler de courage pour oser dénoncer.
Under the control of a very big manipulator, I had to double my courage to dare denounce.
À cette époque, dès mes premières rencontres avec l'intervenante sociale et mon avocat, j'ai eu le sentiment que mes appréhensions et mes cris de détresse n'étaient pas assez pris au sérieux.
At that time, from the beginning of my meetings with the social worker and my lawyer, I had the feeling that my fears and my cries of distress were not being taken seriously.
Le simple fait qu'ils ont essayé de dédramatiser ma situation n'a fait qu'augmenter mon angoisse et mon insécurité, ce qui a permis à une plus grande latitude à mon agresseur.
The only fact that they tried to de-dramatize my situation brought about as a consequence that they increased my anxiety and my insecurity, and this gave even more latitude to my aggressor.
Compte tenu de la gravité de la situation, j'ai senti que je n'étais pas entendue.
Given the seriousness of the situation, I felt I was not being heard.
Puis vient le jour où mes craintes furent confirmées.
And then the day came where my fears were confirmed.
21 ans s'est écoulé depuis la mort de mes 2 petits garçons.
21 years have passed since the death of my little boys.
Il serait faux de dire qu'aucun avancement n'a été apporté au sujet de cette problématique.
It would be false to say that no progress has been brought in the matter of this problem.
Cependant, à mon humble avis, il reste encore de nombreux changements à faire.
Nevertheless, in my humble opinion, there are still many changes to do.
Ma bataille contre la violence conjugale et les drames familiaux a été mon leitmotiv pour ma propre survie.
My struggle against domestic violence and family dramas were my leitmotif for my own survival.
La publication de mon livre m'a donné l'occasion de faire de nombreuses conférences et apparitions publiques, ce qui m'a permis de rencontrer et de discuter avec plusieurs victimes et divers professionnels qui sont en lien direct avec la problématique.
The publication of my book gave me the opportunity to go to many conferences, to have many public appearances, and this enabled me to meet and have conversations with many victims and many professionals who are directly connected to the problem.
Dans ces discussions, quoique flattées, j'ai tout de même été étonnée lorsque plusieurs d'entre eux, baignant dans le domaine, m'ont affirmé avoir mieux compris la complexité de ce phénomène suite à la lecture de mon témoignage.
During these conversations, although I was flattered, I was still surprised when several among them that were immersed in the field affirmed to me that they understood the complexity of this phenomenon better after having read my testimony.
Mon long combat m'a aussi mené vers l'idée d'un projet documentaire.
My long struggle brought me as well to have the idea of a documentary project.
En ce sens, j'ai regroupé 5 mamans qui ont vécu un drame similaire au mien.
In that sense, I gathered 5 moms who lived a similar drama to mine.
Ces victimes étant les personnes les plus directement touchées et affectés par ces drames, j'ai considéré qu'elles étaient une ressource clé en termes de prévention et d'intervention.
These victims, being people that were the most directly touched and affected by these dramas, I consider them to be key resources in terms of prevention and intervention.
Au sein de ce groupe, 9 petites innocentes victimes ont été froidement assassinées par nos ex-conjoints, c'est-à-dire le père des enfants.
Among this group, 9 young, innocent victims were coldly murdered by our ex-partners, that is to say, the fathers of our children.
Ces femmes, victimes de violences à divers niveaux, étaient tous dans un contexte de séparation conjugale, où des procédures légales au sujet des enfants étaient en cours.
These women, victims of violence at different levels, were all in the context of domestic separation, where legal procedures in the matter of the children were taking place.
Dans nos longues discussions, un point en particulier a vivement retenu mon attention.
During our long conversations, one point in particular strongly attracted my attention.
Chacune d'elles a eu le sentiment de ne pas avoir été crue et comprise dans leurs cris de détresse pour la protection de leur enfant.
Each one of these women had the feeling of not having been neither believed nor understood in their cries of distress for the protection of their children.
Une expérience similaire et plus que troublante qui m'avait anéanti 20 ans auparavant.
A similar experience, and an experience that was more than troubling, that had almost annihilated me 20 years prior.
Surprise qu'encore aujourd'hui, les victimes ne soient pas réellement plus protégées, me prouve bien l'impuissance des ressources pour contrer ce phénomène social.
Surprised by the fact that even today these victims aren't really more protected, this proves to me the impotence of the resources that exist to counter this social phenomenon.
Au-delà du harcèlement et des menaces de mort de la part de nos conjoints, nous avons toutes demandé de l'aide et protection pour nos enfants, que ce soit à nos travailleurs sociaux, aux policiers, aux juges, à nos avocats, à la direction de la protection de la jeunesse. Et malgré l'énonciation de ces fortes appréhensions, aucune mesure sérieuse, proportionnelle à la gravité de la situation n'a été prise.
Beyond the harassment and the death threats that were made by our partners, we all asked for the help and protection for our children, be it from our social workers, the policemen, the judges, our lawyers, the director of youth protection. And in spite of us talking about our strong concerns, no serious measure proportional to the seriousness of the situation was taken.
Plusieurs raisons justifiaient l'inaction de ces ressources, avec
Several reasons justified the lack of action of these resources.
les droits du père et des dossiers criminels vierges, qui, bien entendu, est très fréquent en violence conjugale, puisque la victime n'a jamais dénoncé par peur de représailles.
The rights of the father and the clean criminal files, which of course is a very frequent situation in domestic violence, given that the victim does not dare make a denunciation out of fear of reprisals.
Il y a aussi l'insuffisance de preuves, la faible probabilité d'un drame familial, l'évaluation erronée de la situation et un mauvais jugement de la dangerosité de l'individu et du risque d'homicide.
There's also the matter of insufficient evidence, the weak probability of family drama, the erroneous assessment of the situation, and a bad judgment in the matter of the dangerousness of the person and the risk of homicide.
Bien entendu, je suis consciente que ces situations sont extrêmement complexes et chargées d'émotions et de contraintes légales, mais l'état émotionnel, physique et mental des victimes ne devrait jamais constituer un biais, mais au contraire, il devrait être un outil supplémentaire pour détecter la gravité et la nature de la menace tout à fait réelle.
Of course, I am aware that these are extremely complex situations. These are situations charged with emotions and legal constraints. But the emotional, physical, and mental state of the victims should never be a bias. Quite the contrary, this should be an additional tool to be able to detect the seriousness of the matter and the nature of the threat, which is totally real.
La crédibilité accordée aux appréhensions, aux peurs, aux inquiétudes vives avant le drame est d'une importance cruciale.
Now, the credibility given to the concerns, the fears, the very vivid fears before the drama are of crucial importance.
À mon humble avis, on devrait offrir aux intervenants concernés une formation spécifique sur les homicides intrafamiliaux.
In my humble opinion, there should be the possibility to give to stakeholders that are involved, to give them a specific training concerning intra-domestic homicide.
Et en ce qui concerne la protection des enfants, une mesure pourrait être mise en place pour un retrait temporaire des enfants pour les deux parents, afin d'assurer leur sécurité tant que le danger reste à un niveau critique.
And as far as the protection of children is concerned, a measure should be implemented whereby temporarily these children could be withdrawn for both parents in order to ensure their safety while danger is at a critical level.
En ce qui me concerne, je n'ai eu le droit à aucun cours sur la violence conjugale pendant mes 5 années d'études universitaires après la mort de mes enfants.
As far as I am concerned, I had the right to no course whatsoever concerning domestic violence during my 5 years of university studies after my children's death.
Pourtant, ma formation m'ouvrait plusieurs portes qui pouvaient me mettre en lien direct avec ce type de victime.
And still my training was opening me several doors that could put me in direct contact with this type of victims.
Outre mon expérience personnelle, comment aurais-je pu intervenir adéquatement avec si peu d'outils dans des situations aussi complexes?
Beyond my personal experience, how could I have intervened adequately with such few tools in such complex situations?
En mars 2015, dans le cadre de la Semaine nationale du travail social, j'ai été invitée comme conférencière à l'Université d'Ottawa.
In March of 2015, in the framework of the National Week of Social Work, I was invited as a speaker to the Université d'Ottawa, the University of Ottawa.
Suite à mon passage, j'ai reçu dans cette lettre la confirmation que des sessions portant sur la violence conjugale seront désormais données dans ce programme.
After my participation, I received in a letter, the confirmation that sessions concerning domestic violence will now be given in this program.
Il en est de même à l'Université de Chicoutimi dans le cadre des cours en pratique infirmière. J'avoue, j'en suis particulièrement fière.
Same thing for the Université de Chicoutimi, the University of Chicoutimi, in the framework of courses in nursing practice. I must admit, I'm particularly proud.
La violence conjugale concerne tout le monde. J'ai souvent constaté qu'on associe encore ce genre de drame aux plus démunis de la société.
Domestic violence affects or concerns everybody, and too frequently I paid attention to the fact that this type of drama is still associated to the deprived, the destitute, the poorest in our society.
Cependant, cette perception erronée a quelque peu changé depuis l'horrible tragédie du cardiologue Guy Turcotte ayant assassiné ses 2 enfants en 2009.
Still, this erroneous perception changed a tiny bit since the horrible tragedy of the cardiologist Guy Turcotte, who murdered his 2 children in 2009.
Dans le meilleur des mondes, une meilleure compréhension du phénomène dans toute la société pourrait faire une différence.
In the best of worlds, a better understanding of the phenomenon in all societies could make a difference.
Compte tenu des signes avant-coureurs avant un passage à l'acte, les familles, les amis et les proches pourraient intervenir s'ils étaient conscients de la dangerosité du phénomène.
Taking into consideration the early warning signs before action, families, friends, relatives could intervene if they were aware of the level of danger of this phenomenon.
Au contraire, l'entourage de la personne qui a été laissée nourrit souvent la rancune et la vengeance déjà bien établies. Ou à l'inverse, on juge encore inopportun d'intervenir dans une relation d'intimité.
But, quite the contrary, the close circle of the person who is left feeds very frequently resentment and revenge, and that is already very established, or it is considered still inappropriate to intervene in an intimate relationship.
Pour en revenir au documentaire, un manifeste de 22 pages y a été ajouté.
Let's come back to the matter of the documentary. A manifest of 22 pages was added.
Ce document, appuyé par plus de 15 000 signataires, porte principalement sur les observations de chacune des survivantes quant aux lacunes du système en ce qui concerne nos drames, et de nombreuses recommandations s'y retrouvent. Je vous invite à le lire et à le visionner au www.lesurvivantes.com.
This document, supported by more than 15,000 signatories, has to do with the mainly observations of each one of the female survivors as far as the gaps in the systems go, as far as our dramas and the many recommendations that are there. Let me invite you to read this document and to see it in www.lesurvivantes.com.
Ce manifeste, qui nous a demandé un travail de longue haleine, a été remis à tous les médias afin que la couverture médiatique de ce genre de drame permette de conscientiser la population adéquatement.
This manifest that demanded from us work that was long-term was submitted to all the media for the media coverage of this type of drama to enable the population to become aware in an adequate fashion.
Mais il a été aussi remis à tous les ministres et tous les députés du Québec.
But it was also submitted to all the ministers and all members of Parliament in Quebec.
Malheureusement, à part quelques poignées de main et sobres félicitations lors de ma présence en chambre parlementaire, personne d'entre eux n'a donné suite à ce magnifique document.
Unfortunately, besides a few handshakes and some serious congratulations, while I was in Parliament, none of these people made any follow-up to this wonderful document.
Encore aujourd'hui, du point de vue légal, il y a peu de ressources pouvant assurer la sécurité à long terme des conjointes, qui en viennent tôt ou tard à se sentir plus en sécurité en retournant au sein de la dynamique.
Even today, at the legal level, there are few resources that could ensure long-term safety for female partners that one day or another could feel more safe going back to this dynamic.
Se sortir d'un contexte est une chose, en sortir sauf en est un autre, et en sortir sain et sauf en est un autre aussi.
To come out of a context such as this one is one thing. To come out of it safe is another. And to come out of it in health and in safety, that's even another one.
Il est triste de constater que les victimes sont ignorées des instances politiques publiques. Et il en est de même dans l'après-drame.
It is sad to pay attention to the fact that victims are ignored by political and public entities, and same thing after the drama.
L'IVAC, l'indemnisation des victimes d'actes criminels, en est un exemple flagrant.
IVAC, the indemnisation des victimes d'actes criminels, is a very clear example.
Suite à l'assassinat de nos enfants, nous ne sommes pas considérés comme des victimes, mais plutôt comme des proches de victimes. En ce sens, aucune aide nous est accordée.
After the murder of our children, we were not considered victims, but rather relatives of victims, and in that sense, no help was given to us.
Tout compte fait, j'ai cherché pendant plus de 20 ans la solution idéale qui aurait pu faire en sorte que mes enfants auraient eu la vie sauve.
Taking everything into consideration, for 20 years I sought an ideal solution that could have made for my children to be safe and in life.
Cependant, une en particulier me revient toujours en tête, qu'il faudrait peut-être prendre la peine d'être analysée.
Still, there's one thing in particular that comes back to mind that would maybe be worth being analyzed.
Selon ma propre expérience, et dans tous les cas que nous avons explorés, nous avons remarqué que le conjoint commettant l'homicide, même s'il nous enlève ce que l'on a de plus précieux au monde, c'est-à-dire nos enfants, prend bien soin de prévoir des mesures pour diminuer au maximum le conjoint qui survit.
According to my experience, and in all the cases we explored, we paid attention to the fact that the partner that commits the murder, even if he takes away from us what is the dearest to us in the world, our children, makes sure to implement measures that take away from us as much as possible, us, the partner that is surviving.
Dans de telles circonstances, la loi devrait contrecarrer des plans semblables.
In such circumstances, law should counter similar plans.
Aussitôt le cas est authentifié comme étant de nature criminelle, les biens et les avoirs de ces individus seraient différés au profit du conjoint survivant.
The minute the case is considered authentic and as having a criminal nature, the assets and the belongings of these people should be given to the benefit of the surviving partner.
Dans la nature égocentrique et narcissique de ces meurtriers, un tel amendement pourrait constituer une mesure dissuasive ou un signe avant-coureur s'il y a liquidation de ces biens.
in the egocentric and narcissistic nature of these murderers, such an amendment could be a measure that could dissuade or could be considered a precursor if there is a liquidation of the assets.
Bien entendu, pour ne pas augmenter le risque d'homicide conjugal ou de familicide, il faudrait prévoir que dans un tel cas, les biens et les avoirs seront légués à la succession du conjoint assassiné, jamais au profit de l'assassin.
Of course, in order not to increase the risk of family homicide or famicide, one should come to a situation whereby assets and belongings should be left to the partner and never to the murderer.
Pour ma part, je suis certaine que mes enfants seraient encore parmi nous aujourd'hui si une telle loi avait existé. Je suis convaincue que mon ex-conjoint n'aurait jamais assassiné mes enfants, sachant que tous ces biens et avoirs si précieux me reviendraient ou reviendraient à ma famille. J'en suis totalement convaincue.
On my part, I am certain that my children would still be among us today had a law like this existed then. I am convinced that my ex-partner would have never murdered my children had he known that his assets and his belongings that were so precious to him would have come to belong to me or to my family. I'm totally convinced.
Pour terminer, en mon nom, en celui de mes fils et de toutes les victimes qui ont si injustement perdu la vie, je tiens à vous dire du plus profond de mon cœur un immense merci pour vos innombrables heures de travail pour notre cause. Vous avez vraiment toute ma reconnaissance.
And to end, on my behalf, on behalf of my sons, and on behalf of all the victims who so unfairly lost their lives, I would like to tell you with all my heart that I thank you immensely for your enormous amount of works, of hours of work for our cause. I really give you my gratitude.
Avant de quitter, je voudrais vous dire que j'ai apporté quelques livres. Ils sont malheureusement juste en français, mais cependant, je serai disponible si vous avez des questions à venir me poser. Et mon conjoint est avec moi, il est parfaitement bilingue, alors il va faire la part des choses entre nos discussions. Alors, une fois encore, un immense merci à vous tous. Merci infiniment.
Before leaving, I'd like to say that I brought a few books. Unfortunately, they're only in French, but I'll be available if any of you wants to ask me any questions. I brought my translator, my partner, and he's totally bilingual, and he will help us during these conversations. Once again, I thank you infinitely.
Merci.
Good morning, everyone. I first want to thank you all for taking time out of your important work to attend this conference and for giving me a space to share my story and experiences. I'd also like to give a big thank you to the Canadian Domestic Homicide Prevention Initiative with Vulnerable Populations and the Centre for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children. I am Maha El-Birani. I grew up here in London, Ontario, from the age of 2 until 25. I now work in humanitarian aid with Syrian refugees in Lebanon. I am a domestic homicide survivor, at least that's what the journal articles call me, and I will be sharing with you some insights on an immigrant's perspective and experience with language, cultural, and other barriers that make it more difficult to report domestic violence and access services. This is my dear and sweet mama, Sonia. She was murdered by my father in April 2012 after 29 years of oppression and abuse. I would like to introduce you to Mama by quoting my older sister. Mama was beautiful inside and out. Her eyes were the color of emerald jewels, and they sparkled through all the pain they carried. Her skin was so soft, and her hands were so elegantly beautiful. She was a teacher early in her career and later went back to college part-time while working full-time to get a diploma in early childhood education at the age of 49. She then shifted careers and became a daycare worker, helping many mothers to raise their young children. 6 months before she was killed, she began a job with the London Middlesex Health Unit as a family home visitor. She would work with a newly arrived family into Canada that needed help finding resources, maybe a new mother feeling overwhelmed, needing a helping hand or some encouragement and guidance. Sadly, she was not able to do this for long. She was strong yet delicate, confident yet so humble, kind and so wise. She was a loving daughter, sister, mother, grandmother, teacher, and caregiver. She was so much to so many people. She was my best friend and my hero. Mama grew up in a small town in Lebanon with a strong sense of community, belonging, and a very big family. She had 10 brothers and sisters, and she loved and respected her parents, and especially her father, very much. My grandfather was an agricultural engineer working in the Ministry of Agriculture, and my grandmother was a homemaker. Mama was a very intelligent child. She skipped the 3rd grade. She told me she remembered my grandfather took her out that day, just the two of them, for a 7-Up in celebration, and she felt so special. Mama was a teacher. She taught French in Lebanon. She married my father, a history teacher, when she was 21 in 1982. At the time, Lebanon was in the middle of its 15-year-long civil war that ended in 1990. The civil war in Lebanon had many factions and led to high levels of corruption in all public institutions and authorities that the country still suffers from today. My father was abusive from the beginning of their marriage. Mama was extremely principled and always believed that protecting your family's reputation was very important. In 1989, my parents immigrated to London, Ontario, Canada, to seek better work opportunities. The civil war in Lebanon had inflated the Lebanese lira so much that their salaries as teachers was worth less than the gas it took to drive to work. Mama said sometimes we would have 1 potato for dinner, so she would feed my father and sister, breastfeed me, and go to bed hungry herself. Mama was 28 when she came to London, with 3 young daughters and an abusive husband. We moved to London where we had some extended family on my father's side. She only spoke French and Arabic, so she started with some ESL classes. My father was soon diagnosed with clinical depression with some paranoia. He attempted suicide around this time, and Mama had to quit her job working at the counter of a donut shop to take care of him. I wanted to go into all of these details so we could put ourselves in Mama's shoes. She has left her big family and community with 3 young daughters and a mentally ill husband. She does not speak the language nor have any support system in her new home. She is a very intelligent and independent woman that came from a well-respected family. She's not used to asking for help and relies on her own abilities to make it through. She is very nurturing and compassionate, so she takes care of everyone around her, including her abusive husband, because of his mental illness. She sees him as a sick man. She is also coming from a country where authorities are not trustworthy or supportive. In fact, a domestic violence law wasn't passed until 2014 in Lebanon. As the years passed, we adapted and made the best of our situation. Mama was working in daycares and going to college in the nights. We were playing with our friends in the neighborhood, and my father was usually home. He would play cards with his friends in the late evening. He would see his brothers sometimes. He said he couldn't handle the pressures of work. He would have episodes where he would spend much of his time crying. He started physically abusing my older sister around this time. She was a young teen. In 1999, Mama took us to live in Lebanon for 2 years. My father stayed behind in Canada. If he left, he wouldn't be eligible for his disability compensation that he was receiving. We lived in a small village for those 2 years. We connected to our heritage, language, community, and country. When we returned to Canada in 2001, my father's behavior was extremely controlling and erratic. He would have many bad days where he would control what we did. We would turn the home phone ringer off to silent, and we would hope no one would randomly stop by. He wouldn't allow Mama to work and controlled our spending and lives. My sister and I weren't allowed to join any extracurricular activities at school. He would sometimes cause scenes or display this behavior in front of his siblings or other members of the community, and then we would be held accountable by the community. My aunt would come to ask me, why did your father do that? We started to isolate ourselves. We would feel dread at any community event. What if he embarrasses us again? The community also started to leave us out of things. Our uncles would rent a hall and have a gathering to celebrate Eid, or to go for the day to Niagara Falls or Canada's Wonderland and not invite us. If our relatives from out west or from Lebanon came to visit, they would not inform us. So again, we made the best of our situation. Mama started working again, despite my father's orders, and we became closer as mother and daughters, trying not to poke the bear, wake the beast, or step on a mine. We altered our life and behavior to minimize any of his episodes. We operated as an independent unit, isolated from society and our community and extended family. We can do this was always our attitude. If he would just change one day, we could be a happy family. One day in April 2005, I woke up at 5 a.m. to put final edits on a grade 12 social studies essay that was due the next day. I remember the teacher saying to the class she would not accept any late submissions under any circumstances. While working away on the family computer, my father started a fight with my older sister by joking that she should throw her 11-month-old baby off the balcony. He stood towering over her and her son. I tried to protect her by separating them from each other. We rushed to the bedroom to get dressed and ready and out of the house before the tensions escalated. Mama had already left for work. My younger sister went to the kitchen to prepare a bottle for the baby, and we heard screaming. My father had gotten a broomstick to beat us with. He told us we were not to attend school that day because we were bad. He threw my older sister and her babies out of the apartment without shoes, and he kept my younger sister and me inside, swinging the wooden broomstick at our legs and midsections if we were in his way. We called Mama to let her know what was happening. She rushed home to try to convince him to let us out. He did not allow her through the door, and he ripped her headscarf off as he threw her out into the building hallway. At this point, my sister and I saw no way out. We called the police. My father was arrested and charged for physical assault. There was an automatic restraining order put on him so that he could not return home. I want to highlight here that the abuse had been going on for years until we finally called the police once. As I'm sure you know better than I do, there's a lot of literature on the fact that immigrants are far less likely to contact the police for assistance, especially in reporting crimes or other problem situations. So they're a lot less likely to seek contact with the police. And particularly as Lebanese people, we have a very entrepreneurial and do-it-yourself attitude. We have also never had leaders of integrity or any experience with trustworthy authorities in our own country. So since there was a reported and charged physical assault in our family, police and victim services had direct access to our home. At this point, I feel a few things could and should have been done. Perhaps a caseworker should have been assigned to our home to follow up on the situation. Perhaps our school should have been notified and we should have been seeing school counselors. Unfortunately, none of this happened. My father was charged and assigned an anger management course. He went to live with his brother for a few weeks. One day my uncle came for a visit and he begged Mama to take him back. He said he was causing problems in his household. When she wasn't convinced, another uncle visited us and said if we could just take him back for a few weeks, they were going to find him an apartment for him to live in. Mama finally agreed. They dropped him off and we never saw them again. They shunned us from the family and community because we had their brother arrested. We were villains from that day on. So my father attended his anger management course. Once he completed it, the organization sent a letter to Mama saying that he never showed any regret or remorse for his actions. We wondered how this meant he had completed the course. But things were calmer at home, so we minimized, normalized, accommodated, and adapted, as we were used to doing, further isolated from our community. In fact, my best friend's parents would no longer allow her to visit my home. So after calling the police, he was back home. We were further shamed in our community, and the situation became worse. In such a vulnerable state, would you call them again? Time and life went on. I earned my bachelor's in chemical engineering from Western University. Mama earned an early childhood education diploma from Fanshawe. My sister studied her master's in Western and religious thought at McMaster University. I worked at a natural gas distribution company. Mama worked as a teacher in a daycare, and my sister worked part-time at a chiropractor's office. We continued our "we can do this" attitude, surviving and waiting until he would change, disappear, or die. 2 years before the murder, my father had tried to break Mama's neck. My sister and I pulled him off of her. We called our uncles for help, as they had expressed that they wished we would have done that instead of calling the police in 2005. And they sent their sister to our home to tell us that they did not want to get involved. As my aunt left, my sister told her if they did not help us, someone would leave our house in a body bag, and it would probably be Mama. She asked my uncles to meet with her later in the week, but they stood her up. My father had always been unemployed, and Mama, my sister, and I always worked to support the household. Was it fair that we have to leave our home because he was a horrible person? I used to try to think of ways to make him leave. My head would hurt trying to think of a solution. None of the solutions were fair. Should my parents get divorced? Should we go to a women's shelter? Should we all move out and leave him? Would he follow us? All of the solutions I could think of resulted in us giving up everything and still living in fear. I want to mention here the option of divorce. While it's permissible in our religion to divorce, culturally it's shameful. A girl from a broken home will have more difficulties getting married, and this is an important part of traditional societies. So this was a major cultural barrier to us leaving. My father had a therapist he saw monthly or quarterly for over a decade. He was diagnosed with clinical depression and needed to see the therapist to get prescriptions for his medications. A few weeks before the murder, Mama called the therapist to tell him that things were getting bad in our home and asked him if he was getting any indication of other issues my father may have been having. He told her that my father never spoke at his sessions. He would remain silent for the hour, take his prescription, and leave. I wonder where was his due diligence. The therapist told Mama, if he ever gets violent, just call the police. But what if he was too violent, and what if it was too late to call the police? In April 2012, our worst fear was realized. He was too violent. And when my sister and I returned home from our friends on the night of the 11th, it was too late. Mama was by the door, stabbed 25 times, and bled out to death. I hope that sharing my experience with you shines a new light on how to work with and help families in similar situations as ours. The situation is very complex, and culture and background is a very important aspect to be sensitive to. In the words of the justice that sentenced my father to 25 years in prison for the crime of second-degree murder, you have every right to be angry. Anger is not necessarily a negative emotion. We need anger to make sure we defend those who are defenseless. We need anger to motivate us to change people's impressions of domestic violence and to end complacency. So anger, hang on to it, but make it a good anger. Make it a positive anger. Thank you.
On behalf of everybody here, I want to thank Terry and Marianne and Marie Paul and Mawa for the very powerful presentations. I think one of the comments, Maha, when you talked about sort of the anger, and I guess a challenge for all of us as we try to process the pain is how do we channel the pain and the anger and the sadness, profound sadness, in a way that's helpful and supportive. And I guess I'd like all of us to reflect on that. We owe it to the survivors, we owe it to their family members to try to carry on and to do our best. And we promise to honor the family members you've lost, to try to carry on. I want to just, again, reflect to make sure all of you look after yourselves. So obviously all of you, some of you have come with friends and colleagues, so make sure you do what you can for self-care, and also make sure you reach out to people like Deb or the counselors that are available in Salon C, and also with the elders. It's important that we look after ourselves and try to channel our energy in the most productive way possible. I just want to highlight just a couple things, just so you know who's in the audience. Just very briefly, there's 450 people. We represent all provinces and territories across the country. We have people working in child protection, police, anti-violence services, We have academics, and we have, in terms of hope for the future, we also have graduate students who are in psychology, social work, sociology. They represent the future for our research long after Myrna and I retire, which might be by Thursday. There's lots of people who are certainly going to be carrying on the work, and that's very important. There's lots of great resources. Actually, Myrna just has published a new book, and I mention that because one of the ways to look after yourself, one of the newest piece of research on self-care and vicarious trauma is being a lifelong learner. So continuing to learn to improve your interventions, improve risk assessment are obviously a key, and Myrna has pulled together a book which is part of our knowledge mobilization strategies, and that book and many other books are available downstairs, as are the innovation showcase. So I hope you take time to go from the anger and despair to also maintain room for hope and change for the future.